Hey, this is Rob. Welcome to Crazy Town. We're really excited about the bonus interviews that we've been able to bring you this season. Hope you're enjoying them. If you are, please share them with your friends and family and invite them to subscribe to the podcast. Today's interview is between Asher and Douglas Rushkoff. It's an exciting one, so let's get right to it.
Douglas Rushkoff is an author, a professor, a podcaster, a longtime technology and new media critic. He's a friend of Post-Carbon Institute. We've had you on this podcast before, and our sister podcast, What Could Possibly Go Right, a bunch of times. I think you and Vicky are like thick as thieves at this point, yeah?
Yeah, we are. We're cosmic twins.
Yeah, I feel that way about her too.
We're mothers of a different child.
Yes, yeah.
That. I forgot what they call it.
There's a shorthand, I think, for some of us here. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time running through the many interesting facets of your life and work, Douglas, but I just want to highlight a few things for our listeners, okay? One is I want to encourage people to check out the excellent podcast Team Human and the book by the same name. And I also want to mention that you have a new book out called Survival of the Richest. There it is. Yeah. Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires. I think last time we had you on, you talked a little bit about that experience you had where you were invited, you thought, to give a public talk, but instead were asked questions by a group of billionaires trying to figure out how to make sure that their security detail didn't, do them in when the apocalypse happened. That book is really fantastic. Just exploration of the delusions, and this is part of what I want to talk to you about today, of people with a lot of money, a lot of access to technology, and probably a lot of hubris, and the weird juxtaposition between a certain level of brilliance and success and a bunch of what I see as just insane delusions, which I find fascinating and also crazy making. And I think that maybe you could relate to that. So I want to talk to you specifically about something that is kind of been I guess a buzz term, buzz concept in mainstream media recently. It's got a lot of adherence in sort of that wealthy tech class of people like Elon Musk and others. And it's actually been seeping into the world of philanthropy and academia and politics. And that term, that concept is long-termism. Have you heard of this term?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about long-termism as kind of as a subset of almost a quasi-fascist ends justifies the means worldview that it kind of got repopularized by Stuart Brand and the clock of the long now, and this idea of thinking in 10,000 year intervals, which in itself was okay. But what happened was this idea of kind of really super long-term thinking dovetailed with that kind of singularity university idea of super scaled thinking. Right. So we're going to think in super long time zones, and everything that we do, everything solution that we come up with has to work at scale.
Yeah.
Big, it's a moonshot, $100 million. So, and that's what led to this other thing. The term long-termism as you're using it now, to me, is more like this focusing on the distant future, on the strange attractor at the end of time, at the omega point, at the great shift, at the moment of transubstantiation, at when consciousness rises from the chrysalis of matter as pure energy. And when we use that as our theory of change, the long term, that thing, what often happens is we're looking so far ahead that we're not looking at what Marxists would call conditions on the ground.
Yeah.
You know, what's happening in the real world with real people in this moment, and who am I willing to stamp on or do something in order for that long-term thing? And then that dovetails with this other thing they're calling effective altruism, which is basically that you don't have to really worry about what you're doing as long as you spend a lot of money invested in these great long-term solutions that will solve things for your great-great-grandchildren. And that's sort of the problem that a lot of us are looking at.
I think that, so here, these buzz terms, right? So long-termism, effective altruism, transhumanism, existential risk. These things are all sort of in this goulash together, and I think it could be difficult for people to sort of like understand what these concepts mean. But you're right; they're sort of like in this pot that have been sort of fused into this vision, and it's actually guiding big spending and philanthropy. Setting up academic institutions. Trying to influence UN policy stuff. There's people, billionaires who are basically bankrolling campaigns of politicians with sort of this long-termist mindset.
And the whole thing is, right, and it's rather than looking at each individual term, because there's so many and they're going to come up with new ones, it's sort of the job for those of us in Crazy Town who are trying to work against the crazy-making forces is to see sort of the common underlying principles of all these things. Like one big clue that you're dealing with this kind of bad long-termism, effective altruism, eyes on the prize, quasi-fascist thing is it completely compatible with capitalism?
Right. Good.
If it is, then chances are there's a problem here, right? Because capitalism may be the core problem, right? Is it compatible with exponential growth? If it is, then there may be a problem.
Does it take a fantasy dream of exponential growth?
I know. It's the ultimate disaster, catastrophe, capitalism, thing. All right. Does it take people's eyes off conditions on the ground, the welfare of people living right now in Pakistan with water up to their knees? Or does it put attention on them, right? If it's taking attention off them, again, wrong basket. You're going in the crazy basket. Do they use big terms like Deleuze and Desjardins and whatever? Wrong basket. Just stay here. Be here now.
Now, so that's a question for you, which is, it does feel like there's a guy who wrote, I think has been really outspoken on the dangers of this long-termist stuff. A guy named Emil Torres, who has written actually a great piece I would suggest people check out in Salon. I think it was called Understanding Long-Termism, Why This Suddenly Influential Philosophy is So Toxic. And he does talk about it as like a quasi-religion. And so that is a question. I mean, what you just laid out, is if the people behind this were just completely cynical, they wanted to maintain capitalism as it was. They wanted to maintain their status, and power. They don't want to deal with, reality on the ground, like hundreds of millions of people being flooded around the world right now because of climate change. So let's come up with some sort of bullshit, belief system so that we don't have to actually change anything that we're doing. Or so is it just a cynical ploy, manipulative ploy, or do they actually believe this shit? Because, and again, what this shit is,
for most of them,
just to point this out to people is, like at the extremes is this vision of something like 10 to the 45th power number of humans. Okay, so that's a 1 with 45 zeros, colonizing the entire universe, living in both like a physical plane and a virtual plane, and that's our fate and our destiny. That we need to, and we need to do all kinds of things like genetically modify our bodies and like fuse with technology and maybe even do things like think about who reproduces. There's some really sketchy, scary eugenic shit in there. All with this idea that like our fate as humans is to colonize the stars, right? And you hear Elon Musk talking this way. You look at Jeff Bezos. You look at a bunch of these guys. With their space penises. It's like, do they believe this shit or not?
Well, they do, and they don't. I mean, there's so many ways to look at it. One, they are they are leaning in to a very particular attribute of their spectrum disorders, right? Which is not to say that there's no problem with having spectrum. I've got my own spectrum disorders and all that, but I know how to sort of compensate for certain antisocial, analytic, alienated perspectives. I can really easily, especially on acid, I can zoom out and look at civilization like this giant anthill and think about systems theory and how it all actually works. But I know that while that's interesting and some insights can come from it, I also know it's a social and ethical liability, right? And that I have to also maintain my interhuman connection with others and the soft, squishy liminal spaces between us all in order to compensate for my otherwise nerdy analytic distance thing. So the folks that are doing this, most of the ones I've spoken to aren't saying, oh, I think people suck and all that. No, they'll say, well, humanity is a problem. It is the problem. We are solving for humanity with systems. We are solving for humanity with technology, right? Rather than solving for technology with humanity. They'll even use phrases like, humane technology. So what does that mean? The technology is treating us humanely, right? Which is nice, right? That means well, but it's still got the emphasis is reversed. The dynamic, the subject object figure ground is kind of reversed. But you're right. There's this belief, and it's mathematical. It's almost like Jeremy Bentham. He was this utilitarian guy on steroids. There's going to be 500 trillion humans spread out the heavens a couple of thousand years from now. What does the pain and suffering of a mere 8 billion people who are on this planet now, the larval stage of what is ultimately a winged, human species? We are the maggots to their butterflies or whatever they're going to be after the great metamorphosis. So, and only the super wealthy and the technologists actually can somehow upgrade themselves to the point where they get to participate in the next one, right? They get to go because they're going to have the vampire blood or neural nets or whatever they stick on themselves to migrate to the next thing. But that's back to, again, simple ends justifies the means. It's the same thing as it's okay for these Israelite slaves to die as long as I get my pyramid. We've been doing this a long time.
But it's cloaked, and we've also been doing this for a long time. It's cloaked in a morality, right? It's presented as a moral proposition, right?
But they think of it as that.
Well, that's what my question. Do they think of it as that?
A billionaire tech bro, send a billionaire tech bro down to South America. Let him do ayahuasca with a shaman, and he will come back enlightened, but in this way, right? Because his set and setting is still extraction, domination, colonialism, and capitalism. So if those are your underlying assumptions about reality, then Earth Mother talks to you on ayahuasca, but you don't get a hippie person, you don't get a post-capitalist, you don't get a crazy town member, you get a tech bro on acid, right? Which is a very different trip, right? And they come back with this kind of systems, something that sounds very psychedelic, which is the most dangerous group, or this kind of psychedelic group of white male intellectuals. We don't even have to say their names because I don't want to be mean to any individual struggling human, but they do this kind of rebellious wisdom thing where they hypnotize you with their kind of psychedelic poetry and help you make sense of reality by seeing, by imagining and hallucinating the great fractal at the end of time, and imagining, sometimes they call it game B or plan X or X prize, and again, it's always that other thing rather than what's happening here. And when we say, well, what about what's happening here now? They're like, well, if you don't, we're architecting the future of civilization. You're stuck you're back in the old game.
Right.
You're back in the old battles, the old dialectics. You're still stuck with Marx and Hegel. We've gone on through Ayn Rand to the next dimension.
One of the things I think that is so frustrating and crazy making for me about it is there are some elements of sort of the long-termist view that I would agree with, right? I mean, a focus on future generations is important. We've had on our podcast, we did a whole episode talking about the discounting of the future, right? And that is a tendency, it's sort of a human cognitive bias to do, but also our institutions tend to discount the future. And so if we actually said, let's presence future generations in our decision making now, like when we think about the impacts of climate change, for example, or our use of resources.
Yes.
I feel like that's something I would agree with. It's just they take it to this extreme. Right?
Yes, but what is our responsibility to future generations, though? Is it to consider this moment a moment of discontinuity and to start over and make everything up like we're in kindergarten? Or is it to do research and reading and history? These are children. They leave college in freshman year with their great idea before they've taken economics or history or anything else. Mark Zuckerberg reads a little bit about Augustus Caesar and decides he wants to be Augustus, right? And we should be happy that he's modeling his life after Augustus Caesar instead of Caligula, right?
Suppose, yeah.
So I'm thankful for that, but it's still a fucking Holy Roman emperor, right? And I understand as a 9th or 10th or 11th grader to do that. Perfectly natural. Yeah. When I listen to the conversations of these long-termists, I get it. I was there after 2 bong hits in my dorm room to then talk about, well, what if the whole universe is actually in my fingernail, and then I'm in the fingernail of a giant's universe, and it's like, ooh, right? Christopher Nolan, things within things, worlds within worlds. We're going to rebirth humanity into the next phase of civilization. It's beautiful. But then it's like, okay, now do the work. Now read your history. Read your they're espousing philosophy as if it's state of the art. They're espousing systems theory, and they don't even know what a Mandelbrot set is. It's like, do the fucking homework then in order to bring forward the last 5,000-10,000 years of human civilization into this future, rather than considering this a moment of discontinuity where you, as a baby thinker, somehow are the know-it-all God.
But and I think this is really important. You said discontinuity, right? The idea of disruption is key to their identity, right? And to their vision of the success of technology, right? And that gets back to
creative destruction, but it's actually destructive destruction is what they're doing,
sure,
right? Because mommy and daddy were wrong and all this bad stuff, and I don't want disciplines and categories and fuck you all. It's all just emergent properties, yay, right? It's a balance between emergent properties and static properties. I mean, there's
I think. I do think, again, if we look at you brought up Marx earlier. You look at material conditions, and we've talked ad nauseum on Crazy Town about Marvin Harris, because his framework of thinking about infrastructure and structure and superstructure. Basically it boils down to the idea that our infrastructure, that's the physical world that we inhabit, not just the things that we build, right, are the things that actually dictate our structures, our political systems, our economic systems, and our superstructures, our belief systems, right? So if you actually put that into an individual basis as well, think about what these people have grown up in, right? And they've matured and been involved in the disruptive power of new technology, where they've seen incredible exponential growth in computing and in the internet and all these things, and they envision that is normal, right? Like that's
right. Well, and they think that they've disrupted, but they haven't. All they've really done is confirmed corporate capitalism, and by disrupting
benefited from it.
Tiny playfields. Yes, and benefited from it, and gotten money and cars and chicks and
Right.
drugs and all that stuff. So how do you expect the child, right? The child who was plucked from college freshman year before the myelin sheaths have formed around the dendrites in his frontal lobe, who has no impulse control, and then transfers parental authority onto Peter Thiel or some other venture capitalist. How do you expect him to behave in any better
Right.
way? You can't, right? You can't. So we can't depend on these people. We can't model them. And our kids, I mean, sadly, many of our kids, they think that Musk is a fucking hero.
Yeah, because he's saving us, right? He's
Same just like
Right.
Trump. He's the troll in chief. And it looks like, yeah, take it down, bring down the man, and he is the ultimate man.
it just comes down to I guess I get really pissed about this stuff, and I actually get scared about it, to be honest, because if it was just it's a little bit like, I don't want to compare them to Trump, but a little bit of the effect of that, which is if you had this narcissist out there spouting whatever in order to get validation, and he was a marginal actor, that's one thing. But when it comes to having influence over the events that affect the entire planet, that's another thing, and I feel like there is power in this group, potentially power in these ideas.
Partly because their businesses have scaled. When you own a business like, Uber, Tesla, or Facebook or whatever, and you have this much money. I mean, there was a day I remember last year when Elon Musk bought $1 billion of Bitcoin.
Right.
All of a sudden, with Tesla money. And I remember Philip Rosedale, the guy who created Second Life, who's this friend of mine, very smart. I mean, super smart dude. He did the math and he said, "Oh, you've just reversed like 18 years worth of Tesla sales in one moment in terms of the environmental damage you created with that single Bitcoin
glad
purchase."
he did the math. Yeah, that's interesting. God damn it. Yeah.
But that's power, right? That is power.
Yeah. And that scares me. But I am trying to also, part of it is like, I wonder if any of this community of people can be reached at all. And I'm chastened by what you said about you take them to the Amazon, you give them ayahuasca or whatever, and you still end up with a tech bro. You know what I mean? Like,
I know. I thought that was going to work.
sucks.
I thought that was going to be it when they were going. Right. So Eric Schmidt or whoever can go to Burning Man and do all this stuff, but they go with an RV and a chef and a masseuse or whatever, It's like, all right, that's not Burning Man. That's something else
Well,
that
it
you
gets
just
back
did.
to the system, right? So like you've talked a lot about how, these people who like to think of themselves as disruptive forces, who are hyper rational and whatever it is, they're gonna help humanity exceed the boundaries of the physical plane or whatever, right? They've done is essentially just supercharge capitalism. The system itself, continues. So you could take people out of the system, but when they return to the system, they're just going to fall back into it, into what they know.
Yeah.
And that's really how do we break this? Because
but then again, we got to think like a permaculture
Okay. Yeah.
agriculture person. If that is the human thing, that they always return to the true nature, then we have to help every human return to what we believe is our true
deeper,
nature, which is the deeper collaborative, cooperative, loving, essential human condition, and that we can return to that. So that's why I did the Team Human book. How do we retrieve the human? How do we value that? How do we help people? And we not get people to. That's what the tech bros say. How do we get people to this? No, but how do we engender a social contract? How do where we recognize that the shrill, disconnected, alienated quality of these technologies and these things that we're being invited to do, and how do we help people see the beauty in just, you need a drill to make a hole in the wall? Don't go to Home Depot and buy a minimum viable product drill to make one hole. Ring on your neighbor's bell and ask if they have a drill, and meet somebody. It's like, it's really simple. If we just did that, it would unwind the whole thing. There's so many easy ways. And then it's like, oh, right, that's what they call them, neighbors. And that's just kind of cool. What if we do a block party? I have a lawnmower. Do you want to use that? I mean, we're so afraid to ask for favors or to give favors to each other because we don't want to owe people or something. And it's like, no, that's called the fabric of community and society.
It's back to the system that we're in, right? We've been taught that we're consumers, and we've been taught that relationships are transactional, right? And
we have,
and it's
really
hard to unwind that. But the other thing I think is, and maybe I want to get back to the question of whether these people are reachable or not. But if we see them as the sort of,
they are reachable,
the extreme case, right? The extreme case of a general culture or pattern or whatever it is, what, in some ways it's pretty simple. I feel like what they're manifesting, and what they're manifesting is denial, right? They're denying, it's a denial of death. Right. A lot of this is just being scared of dying, right?
Becker.
And I think we all carry that.
I am. I still have some fear of death. I admit it.
Of course you do. Let's not talk about this anymore. And then there's denial of the body, which I think is really interesting. I mean, Elon Musk, I think talking about, our bodies is just, sacks of meat or whatever. So wanting to upload, our consciousness into the cloud is both denial of death and also this idea that this body is like a fucking mess. It's ugly. It's, it doesn't, it keeps us, chained or whatever, so trying to get away from the body, and then denial of responsibility. So, and you talked about this before, which is, hey, if our number one moral priority is the fate of 10 to the 45th power human beings in the future, we shouldn't be bothered worrying about the conditions of poor people in Pakistan or Sri Lanka or South America, right? So
well, exactly, and that's their philosophical way of justifying their day-to-day activity, which is the long-term good that my taxi hailing company is going to provide humanity is worth the tent villages that are camped out around my corporate headquarters
and
right
all
now
that is
of
denial.
The people that I've
it's
bankrupted.
all denialism, and so let's get back
because externalities are built into capitalism.
Right.
So how do you escape the externalities? Is pretend they're not there, or in this new way, pretend that they are. Right, they're justified because of the great reward that's going to come later.
Right.
You can't have your pudding till you eat your meat.
Right. So yeah, let's talk about if these people are reachable. I mean, and if they're not reachable, what do we do? Do we ignore this shit? Do we build the alternatives like you talked about?
Well, it's always nice to reach one. I mean, I've tried to have these conversations with the ones more at my level, not the billionaires, but the other, whatever they are, intellectual author types with podcasts and things. And they say that I just don't have, that I'm incapable of doing the necessary dimensional thinking in order to truly grasp this fractal sensibility. And I'm a little insulted by that as one of the guys who first wrote about this fractal sensibility in the early 90s when I was a wild
you're
psychedelic.
A dinosaur, man.
Are you serious reading, ranter of Mondo 2000. But I don't believe that the, spoken word leaders of this long-termism and sense-making may be reachable. I do think some of the billionaires are reachable. I mean, the example of the Patagonia guy that just sold his company for $1 billion.
Part of this world, right?
Right. But he was never part of it, so he didn't need to be convinced. He could have been convincing us, the whole time. It's like, I'm not trying to make this money. I'm going to try to give it away. I don't know. He could have set up the company differently at the beginning, but he didn't know this was going to happen. It was just selling coats, for God's sake. But but it could be a little contagious. Even, I mean, I would argue that that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett are at least on, in terms of the spectrum, they're closer to what we're talking about than the Musks and the Thiels and the neo-fascists. They're not accelerationist. They're not techno-solutionist. They are saying, okay, we took too much money out of the system and we got to try to figure out what's the best way to shove it back in there, even if Bill Gates is biased towards X prize size mega solutions, that. Yeah, which that's just him. But at least personality-wise, or in terms of his intention, I think he is more focused on conditions on the ground in the moment than he is on
older and
the
wiser?
crazy future.
Is that because he came to be in an earlier phase of sort of the technology?
Yeah, Microsoft had a very different journey than PayPal, right? Yeah, it's true. They had to deal with the world and China and anti-monopoly stuff, and but he's also, who knows how crazy Bill Gates is and whether he was an Epstein person and God knows what. It could all be, and now he's buying up all this land, and I don't know if that's really the right way to deal with, the future of farming in America is for
You don't think we should put it in Bill
ownership
Gates'
by
hands? Come on.
Somehow I don't. I like distributed ownership of land by many small farmers and all that. And there's ways you can invest in that and help them do that. There's some interesting new money instruments. But I do think some billionaires, if they feel safe enough, can be convinced. But I don't know to what end. I'm way more focused on the little people, on everybody. The way to change a billionaire is if we all stop using Uber, then there's a billionaire whose life is different.
Well, I think also, and this is another thing I've been kind of wrestling with as a question, which is if we're hitting you talked about acceleration. If what we're actually experiencing right now is hitting the limits of the age of acceleration, right? And exponential growth in economic activity, human population, energy consumption, material consumption, and then passing these planetary boundaries, crossing these boundaries, with climate and biodiversity loss. That's all coming, to bear. We're starting to see the real consequences of that. By we, I mean those of us who've basically been benefiting from all of that in kind of the global north, in a subset of us in the global north. If we're hitting those limits right now, which I believe we are, what does that do to this idea of this silly things like let's try to get people to Mars right now? Do people double down on like, oh shit, the only solution to this climate crisis, now look how fucking bad it is we got to get off this planet? So do they double down, or is it a moment of reckoning and humility?
Well, what do bodybuilders do when the steroids stop working?
Well, they probably are enraged.
Do they
break things? I don't know. Not sure.
I think they up their dose.
Probably. Isn't that true with all addictions? If it's not working anymore?
I think so. I think that's what they do. So, when your stocks stop working, you buy derivatives. When your derivatives stop working, you buy derivatives of those. When those stop working, you get credit default swaps. When those stop working, you move to another level of abstraction. What does Facebook do when its
meta
rapaciousness peaks? Go meta, right? And you create a fantasy. What do you do when you can't make any more money in the moment? You become a long-termist. Right? Oh, it's okay. I'm going to pre-colonize the future because I've already colonized everything in the present. I've sucked all the juice out of this thing. So I'm going to be a time-traveling vampire. Right?
Yeah. It's so interesting because this is another question that I've really wrestled with. I was really disappointed by Harari's book, Sapien, for a lot of reasons. But one of them...
I know. Are we allowed to go there?
Well,
I don't know. I was on this thing with him, and I got a cold feeling.
Yeah.
I got a cold feeling. Like I felt like, when Luke is like and it's like Darth Vader's like in his same solar system, and like
Oh,
Luke
yeah,
goes,
he feels him, yeah.
he like can
In
feel.
the
I
Force.
got that feeling, and I don't get that much. And I was
sure
like,
he
wait a
wants to
minute,
be
I thought
compared to
Harari
Darth
wrote like
Vader.
Sapiens, and he's supposed to be all good,
Yeah.
and caring and whatever. But I know, and I hate to say it because I don't like saying mean things about humans. And I'm sure he's a well-intentioned
Yeah.
human, right? He is. But there is a coldness to this understanding of the human future.
Well, yeah, and that's what disappointed me is because I felt like initially, and there's a lot of problematic things in the book, but as general takeaway, presenting in some ways like two tracks that humanity's on right now, right? One track is
Right.
really running up against the limits of what we've been doing, particularly the last couple of centuries, right? Which is a reckoning, and I mean, he even talked about how maybe our biggest fall was agriculture, and so there's like this path of a reckoning, which is the path I believe that we're essentially on. But there's another path that we're walking simultaneously, and that is one where we do have enough power right now and capacity right now to be doing things like fucking with the human genome and doing all kinds of other shit. And I think that's what he was sort of positing is like one way we either go extinct as a species or we re-engineer ourselves as a species, right? And either way, Homo sapiens, the way we've been, will no longer be around, right? And then he basically was like, well, we're going to do the latter, and that was what was disappointing.
Right.
But I do like, it's actually more like speculative fiction. And there's a guy named Paolo Bacigalupi who's written a couple of books that are like these dystopian climate change books. But what's interesting about them for me was like, there's still a bit of like, it's almost like the Elysium film, there's like a population that does have advanced technology while the rest of humanity is basically trying to like scour the wreckages of cargo ships, for things.
Yeah.
And
But the same thing, this thing is still, that model is still saying that rather than arrest the operating system of corporate capitalism, we are going to require human beings to mutate into some post-human, unrecognizable state.
Yeah.
I think it's way easier to change your economic model and start sharing rather than stay addicted to a 13th century economic operating system that was started by a few monarchs to prevent the rise of the middle class. This is really
go to space,
not rocket
which is,
science.
completely energy blind as an idea, right? Like it defies what we could physically do.
Space is sterile also. It's like not a good... It'd be easier to terraform the Earth after a nuclear disaster than to terraform Mars.
It's absurd. But I guess I struggle with this question a lot, which is how long of a runway do these guys have? You know what I mean? In terms of trying to go down this path of trying to pursue the singularity, trying to pursue ever more complex ways of changing, humanity.
Well, what's going to stop them, if not us? What's going to stop them and shorten their runway is the Steve Bannon alt-right. I mean, the woman who just ran for parliament or won parliament in Italy, what she's saying is so close to what we're saying. We're human beings. We're not consumers. We don't want to support big technology. We don't want to support runaway exponential capitalism. We want to be local and return to the ground and the soil and the blood and the, oh, no, we're in that trouble.
You went a little too
Town,
far.
Crazy
Just
Town,
a bit too
Crazy
far
Town.
there. Yeah.
Right.
Crazy Town.
It's because where Crazy Town lives on ice, right? And so we slide, and then, right. So, but if those guys save us, look the fuck out, right? That's not the way. We don't want to save civilization with fucking machetes like the Hutus, right? We there's got to be a middle path.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you boil that down to neighbors? Is it boiled down just to the
neighbors and love and off the ideology? Because I got called by Bannon's people called me, Steve Bannon, to be on his podcast, Pandemic, whatever it's called, War Room Pandemic, because of this very conversation, right, about the dangers of transhumanism, and they don't really have our best interests at heart. And what does that mean? They read Team Human, and where I'm really railing out against the disconnection of humans from ground. I don't mean blood and soil, but soil at least, as a living matrix of sharing between trees, and this topsoil that we shouldn't destroy, real soil. And everything's the same, except their theory of change is just as ends justifies the means as ours. Their theory of change is tear it down and get to the new golden age, as Bannon would put it. And that's or Evola or one of these folks, and that's
the golden age for a specific set
fucked.
of people, right? That we're talking about here, right?
Usually, yeah. They'd say it's for everyone, but it's, for you white dudes, it's, and I'm always a white dude when it's something bad, and I'm never a white dude when it's something of privilege. I'm in that middle place, it's really tricky.
Yeah.
But I accept my lot. I accept my place.
Yeah,
in that.
in the grand scheme of things,
but
not the biggest cross to bear. It says one Jew to the other.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I understand that we're in that liminal place and we get to be hated by everybody, but we don't have to be hated by everybody. And at least we can identify with, oh, they're thinking this, and oh, they're thinking that, and all right, it's a unique vantage point culturally from which to try to reconcile these disparate understandings of the human future.
So maybe we work on some of that denialism, because I don't think that it's just carried by these guys, right? I think we all struggle with denial of death. We all struggle with, those of us, who recognize that we are products of privilege, right? And if you step it out, our friend Nate Higgins has talked about this a lot. There's people who are privileged in the context of other humans right now, but there's also humans in this time being privileged in the context of humanity, both in the past and potentially in the future, right? And it's really hard to kind of sit with that and not be in denial of that privilege and know what to do with sort of the responsibility of that. But if we face that, and then in the denial of the body, right, and our connection with one another, connection to the earth, to other species, maybe we need to work on that stuff, and maybe we can't reach the billionaire types, the ones who are so disconnected. But I do think we all suffer with it, some level, right?
We do, and the fact that we suffer with it in every single place you look could be looked at as depressing and crazy making, or it could be looked at as the opportunity. Right. So one thing I've been doing a lot, and I don't have all the answers yet, but whenever I'm in one of these groups of well-meaning people about economics or this or that, I start to ask, so does anyone in this Zoom have a retirement account? And then they always begrudging, well, yeah, I got that 401k from the place I work. So, well, what's it invested in? Some S&P index fund or something. Well, what's that? And can we possibly do more good with this meeting than you could do good taking your money out of that S&P index fund and either throwing it into community, giving it away, well, I can't do that because then who's going to take care of me in my retirement? It's like, okay, so you're creating a world where no one's going to take care of you in your retirement by having your money invested in the safety, in your safety for that. Right. So it's like, even that, it's like, okay, then go, are you willing, is everyone here willing to take 10% of whatever's in their retirement and put it towards a land trust or something for these people? All right, let's do 10. All right, what about 15? Do I hear 20? And if we start doing it, if we create a world where Social Security is literally social, it's going to force us to engender the kind of society that knows how to take care of itself.
Yeah, I think we're already, and this is true and has been true for many people on this planet for a long time, but I think we are facing times where mutual aid and support is going to be a necessity, right? And so if we step out ahead and if we model it in ways that are really about what you said before, which is belonging and loving and giving. And it is risk taking to do that.
And the models are there. the models are there. African Americans, did the model, right? Since early slavery, they've been doing mutual aid and the equivalent of local currencies and local reinvestment and circular economics. I mean, read Jessica Gordon Nembhard's book, what was it, Collective Courage, and you'll see, oh, there's the models. That's why white people were raiding their towns and rioting them, because they were prosperous, because they understood circular economics. It was like, oh, they did better than the white towns that were still connected to the larger economy, because the larger economy is one big vacuum cleaner. It just sucks the value out of your community. Yeah. So the technologies, I hate to even call them that, the models are there, the approaches, the mechanisms. We've got it all. It's way easier. It's really just a question of will more than it is of means.
Can we just keep a little bit of just laughing at the absurdity of some of this crazy shit out there? Because
I think so. You're the one who got so serious and grounded. I mean, you sounded so reasonable.
I'm trying to be mature, man. But I really rail at this stuff. It drives me nuts.
This is Crazy Town. I've been trying to drag you back into Crazy Town each time. But that's all right. I hope I haven't hurt my image or anything doing that. But you understand. I wasn't saying we should go fascist. I was showing how a line of thinking can end up.
Oh, for sure.
Fascist,
I don't think
right?
anyone would believe that you're arguing to go fascist.
No, but I'm interested in anarcho-syndicalism.
Well, we'll have to have you on another time to talk about that. How's that sound?
Yeah, because that's a word that's crazy making too, but kind of fun.
All right, Douglas, thanks so much. I appreciate it. It's nice to always chat with you, and even though it's crazy making stuff, there's definitely some gems in what you share that I'm going to take with me. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, laugh at it. If you laugh at the crazy and the billionaires, they become smaller, and we and the real world become bigger. That sounds like
a good plan.
It's just like leaving Facebook. I left Facebook and all those things, and someone said to me, "What do you mean you're going to disappear?" And I'm like, "No, I'm going to reappear." Right.
Yeah. Well, I like still being able to see you. I'm going to use the technology for as long as it lasts. This way.
That's fine. To see you, it's okay. It's an exception. The rabbi says it's fine.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Douglas. Talk to you soon.
All right. Be good.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us in Crazy Town. This is a program of Post Carbon Institute. Get more info at postcarbon.org.